Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once there was a very beautiful princess. She had beautiful blue eyes, pink lips, and long black hair. Her complexion was as fair as snow, so people called her Snow White. They would always admire her beauty. But her stepmother was jealous of her beauty. She was a woman of cruel nature, and she never paid any attention to Snow White. She had a magic mirror. She used to stand before it and ask every day, "Tell me, O magic mirror, whether there is anyone more beautiful than I?" The mirror replied, "None, O queen, you are the most beautiful." The mirror's reply would fill the queen with a great sense of pride. Time was passing by. Snow White grew up into a beautiful young girl. Then one day, the queen asked the mirror the same question. The mirror said, "Though you are beautiful, but Snow White is the most beautiful girl in the world." Then the queen became furious. She decided to get Snow White killed. She called a faithful soldier and asked him to kill Snow White. The queen promised the soldier a good reward in return. The soldier was greedy. He took Snow White to the forest, but seeing her innocent face, he changed his mind. He said, "Wait, I am just coming back." He left Snow White alone in the forest and returned to the palace. Snow White sat under a tree and waited for the soldier to return. The soldier did not return. Soon it began to get dark. She began to cry. The frightening sounds of wild animals fell on her ears. At last, she fell asleep. In the morning, the chirping sounds of the birds made her wake up. Then, she began to wander about in search of a way out of the forest. Wandering about in the forest, she happened to see a hut. Seeing the hut, she felt some relief. She went to the hut and found that it was a strange hut. She was surprised to see that everything was very small. The doors, windows, etc. were too small. She knocked at the door, but there was no response from inside. She then entered the hut and saw that on the dining table there were 7 cups, 7 saucers, 7 glasses, and 7 spoons, and all were very small. She guessed that there must be 7 people living in the house. Then she went upstairs and saw the bedroom where there were 7 small beds ready. Then she reached the kitchen and prepared soup to please the people living in the hut. She put the soup on the table. When the dwarfs returned home, they were surprised to see the house neat and clean. Seeing the soup on the table, they questioned one another as to who prepared it. Then they went upstairs to the bedroom and saw Snow White sleeping there. They stood around her bed. Just then, Snow White woke up. Looking at the dwarfs around her, she was little shocked. Then the head of the dwarfs said, "Do not panic. Tell us who you are. How have you reached here?" Snow White narrated the whole story with tears in her eyes. The dwarfs became sympathetic and said, "If you like, you may stay with us." She agreed. The dwarfs were very happy and began to dance with joy. Snow White also felt very happy in their company. The next day, when the dwarfs were ready to go for work, they warned Snow White to be cautious and not to open the door to any stranger. Meanwhile, the soldier returned to the palace and told the queen that he killed Snow White. The queen was very happy. She rewarded the soldier. Then she went to the magic mirror to ask who was the most beautiful woman in the world. The mirror replied, "It is still none other than Snow White, who is living with 7 dwarves in the forest." The queen was upset to know that Snow White was alive. She immediately went to the forest in disguise of an old woman selling fruits. She took some poisonous apples in a basket with her. When she reached the hut, Snow White was alone. She knocked the door. Snow White answered from inside. "Who is there?" "It's the fruit seller. Buy fresh and juicy fruits." The queen replied in a changed voice. Snow White replied, "No, I won't. I am not allowed to open the door. Please go from here." "You seem to be so sensible. Really, one should not open the door for any stranger. I am very impressed with you, so I want to gift you an apple," said the queen in a sweet voice. Snow White innocently believed the queen, and at once opened the door. Seeing Snow White, the queen was happy and said, "You are so beautiful and sensible. Take this apple as a present for you." Snow White took the apple. As soon as she bit into it, she fell unconscious. The queen was very happy to see her dead. She returned to the palace. There, in the jungle, the dwarfs saw the black clouds in the sky as a sign of bad weather. They got worried about Snow White, who was all alone at home. They decided to return home. On reaching home, they found Snow White lying unconscious near the door. The dwarfs did their best to get her conscious, but in vain. Then they saw the half-eaten apple that was also lying there. They guessed that the apple must be poisonous. They began to weep for Snow White. They did not want Snow White away from them, even after death. So they prepared a coffin of glass and put her dead body in it. They took the coffin to the forest. Every day, they would go there and look at her dead body and put flowers. One day, in the evening, when the dwarfs reached the place, they saw a prince staring at Snow White in the glass coffin. He introduced himself to the dwarfs as a prince and asked about Snow White. The dwarfs told him all about her. The prince said, "May I take her to my palace for treatment? How beautiful she is." Saying so, the prince bent on her head and kissed her forehead. The kiss had a miraculous effect. Snow White came to her senses and opened her eyes. Seeing her alive, the dwarfs' joy knew no bounds. They told her about the prince. Snow White thanked him. The prince proposed to her. Snow White agreed. She went to the palace with the prince. The prince married Snow White. The marriage was attended by the dwarfs as well. They began to live happily. But Snow White never forgot the dwarfs and would come to the forest to see them every now and then as a gesture of love and respect.